I want to tell everybody why I decided to start this program called the Sibling Support Program, a family-centered mental health initiative. About 15 years ago, I started to notice at several Boston area inpatient psych units that there were no supports for family members during a child's psychiatric hospitalization, even though these families were usually in a state of crisis as a result of the events leading up to the psychiatric hospitalization. So I began to look at sibling literature, and the literature on the impact of mental illness on siblings is scant. There were several important findings. First, research showed that siblings of children with behavioral or mental health challenges were at risk of developing maladaptive behaviors themselves. Second, we know that repeated exposure to traumatic events can lead to anxiety and depression. Third, we know that siblings, particularly female identifying siblings or sisters, tend to become adult caregivers for brothers and sisters with disabilities in adulthood. And fourth, we know that healthy family functioning, along with family involvement in aftercare, has been positively correlated with improved outcomes for children, especially those in psychiatric settings. So those were very compelling points to me. In 2011, I secured seed money to create what is now known as the Sibling Support Program, a family-centered mental health initiative. When I started, I was hoping to recruit 50 participants if I was lucky. Now, 15 years later, over 3,000 family members have been enrolled in this program across multiple sites in Massachusetts. The program was originally implemented at Cambridge Hospital as an IRB-approved research study, and then it was piloted at Boston Children's Hospital, Franciscan Children's, and currently the principals of this program are now operating at the state hospital, at Worcester Recovery Center, as well as UMass, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but in a few minutes. But I just wanted to start with kind of this overview. Oops, here. Now let's go to the next slide. Okay. When developing this program, I brought together some best practices. I knew that parents and caregivers must be involved in any effort to support siblings, as opposed to traditional sibling support groups where parents drop off the sibling, are not part of the intervention, don't really know what happened in the group, and therefore are unable to build on any learning that's happened at home. I also wanted to utilize parent mentors. Parent mentors, also known as parent partners or family partners, are an enormously important piece of family-centered mental health care today. Parent mentors bring lived experience of raising children struggling with behavioral and mental health issues. They walk the walk every day, just like the families do. And they treat parents as experts in understanding their children, if they have autism, if they have developmental disabilities. And as a result, these parent mentors carry significant credibility among the families. And many parents in my program have reported that they feel more understood and more comfortable working with a parent mentor who has stood in their shoes. I also wanted to involve trainees. When I first started this program, I had a focus group, an advisory group actually, of parents with lived experience and clinicians who were frustrated with the system. And I heard over and over again that that the doctors that these families were bringing their children to never inquired about the well-being of brothers and sisters, even though we know that the brothers and sisters are the ones that are going to be there when the parents are gone, because it is, as you know, the longest lasting family relationship. So I wanted to create opportunities for mental health trainees to have hands-on experience in group work with siblings to promote family-centered mental health care. So now one thing that's very exciting is that the sibling group is part of the psychiatry residency curriculum at both Harvard Medical School and UMass Medical School, as well as other departments curriculum. So when I have trainees that rotate through the sibling group, they learn about what the sibling experience is all about. And I'll be actually talking a little bit later about the trainee experience. But I've trained 100 clinicians and counting in developing family-centered and applying family-centered mental health care. So I'm very excited about that. And offering the program free of charge to families is, I feel, important because, if possible, because families can be under so much stress, and this is one thing we can take off their plate. When we met in person, we actually delivered meals, and that was another way to reduce stress. But right now, this program is completely virtual. Accommodating the schedule for families is very important. Our groups meet in the evenings, so it's after school and after jobs. That seemed to be the best time for families to be able to attend. Again, we're not providing dinner because we meet virtually, but that was a really terrific part of the program initially. And we had food donations. A shout out to Bertucci's, who provided pizza and all sorts of food as a donation. I want to talk for a few moments about, let's see if I'm going to the next, here we go. The program goals. So the program goals are to increase sibling resiliency and decrease trauma, increase parental competency and confidence, because I'm sure that you know that it can be very disheartening for parents when they are raising a child that is struggling. And in terms of those children that end up in a psychiatric setting, the parents can feel like failures. They can feel ashamed and powerless and helpless. So it was very important to me to really boost their confidence as well as their competency as parents. Stabilizing the family unit was important. And again, building capacity among providers who practice family-centered mental health care. So I want to tell you a little bit about how this sibling support program works. Every caregiver of a child or adolescent, let me back up for a moment, because this program is slightly different in different settings. So there's the program that is at Cambridge Hospital. Our parent mentor calls every family member of a child who's been admitted to the inpatient psych unit and personally invites them to participate in this research study. We also have what's known as our community site, which is more than a community site because we serve families across the country. And actually some international families participate as well. And those families respond to a flyer, which I will show later. So we don't have to contact them personally. But what we found is that in very high risk populations, like families of kids that are hospitalized, getting that personal phone call during a time of crisis makes a big difference. So we have multiple groups for family members. We have a caregiver group that is run by our parent mentor, and all of our groups happen simultaneously. And again, they're all virtual. So in the caregiver group, our parent mentor talks to the group. It's a kind of a foundational session to learn about the sibling experience. So she talks about what it's like for kids to grow up with a brother or sister that has struggled with behavioral or mental health needs. She talks about parenting strategies to help build their resiliency and decrease the traumatic effect that they might have experienced from being the target of verbal or physical aggression from the child with behavioral or mental health needs. And then they learn about resources and strategies to access these resources so they're better equipped to manage their home lives. Of course, parents and caregivers do have an opportunity to share their stories. So that's all. There's a big component of peer support in that group. That is for first-time caregivers. When I say caregivers, I mean any adult in a caregiving role is welcome to participate in this group. So we get grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and foster parents and step parents. And similarly for the sibling group, which I'll talk about for a moment, we take siblings that are not just biological siblings, but any child growing up in the home alongside the child with behavioral health needs. So sometimes we get cousins, best friends, foster siblings. So getting back to the caregiver group, that was for first-time parents. When returning parents want to come to the program, they get to meet with me. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and we talk about any stress that's happening in the family, because I know that any stress happening in the family is going to impact the siblings. So that's a very powerful group. There's a lot of tears and support. And in our community site, again, we have families coming together from across the country. And so that's very powerful. I haven't mentioned the word autism yet, but the majority of people that participate in this program are family members of kids with autism, as well as other neurodevelopmental disabilities. In our sibling group, the sibling group is co-facilitated by the trainees that I mentioned earlier. So we have social work interns, psychiatry residents, medical students. We have all kinds OTs. We have all kinds of trainees that are amazing in their work with the siblings. So in the sibling group, the siblings have a chance to meet peers with shared experiences. They learn that they're not alone, that they have a safe place to share their trauma and process their trauma. And most importantly, well, equally importantly, they learn coping strategies. So I want to describe one activity that we use in the sibling group. And this is an activity which is wildly popular because when we were in person, it involved candy. So now that we're virtual, we're not able to distribute candy, but it is called the Starburst Candy Game. And this activity, I received permission to adapt from the Sib Shop curriculum, which I assume many of you are familiar with. And the permission that I got was to adapt the activity to meet the very complex and specific needs of siblings of children that have behavioral health issues. A lot of the children that attend Sib Shop aren't dealing with the specific conditions that kids that are growing up with brothers and sisters with behavioral issues are dealing with. So the way the Starburst game operates is that we have, well, first I should say we always start with introductions and group rules. Currently, in our community site, we have 4 sibling groups that occur simultaneously because we get about 40 to 50 siblings. So we have our littles, we call them the 6 to 8-year-olds, and then 9 to 11-year-olds, 12 and 13, and then our teen group. I think I missed. Anyway, you get the point. So we have age-appropriate cohorts. But every sibling group uses the same activity, and our activities rotate. But so we start with introductions, we go to group rules, and then we have our main activity. So the main activity that I've already alluded to, the Starburst activity, is part of a PowerPoint presentation. The siblings log in and they see different colored stars. They each get a chance to choose a star, and that star, the color of the star is linked to a question. So some of the questions, and each sibling gets a turn reading the question aloud and answering the question, and then there's a discussion about the question. So one question might be, what do you do to feel better when you're upset? And this question actually gives us a baseline of existing coping skills. So that's really helpful when we want to focus on coping skills. We know where the kids, what their understanding is of the term coping skills and what kind of coping skills they're accessing. Other questions that they might choose are, what do you tell other people about your brother or sister? And this is a really interesting question because oftentimes well-meaning parents are telling the sibling to lie about scary things that are happening at home because the parents are trying to protect the privacy of the affected child. But we know that it's never okay for kids to keep secrets about scary things happening at home, and that leads to anxiety and depression. So the curricula for both the parent group and the sibling group reinforce each other. So while we're talking in the sibling group about what do you say to other people about your brother or sister, we're addressing that in the parent group as well. And we're really giving parents access to tools to talk about these hard things at home. So another question might be, do you ever get embarrassed or uncomfortable by your brother or sister's behavior? And again, this is an opportunity for the siblings to share their stories. And the facilitators do a great job validating their experience and talking about coping strategies. What I love best is when the siblings are directly supporting each other. And recently, we've had requests from the siblings to connect outside of the sibling group. We have one little guy named Harry who attended 26 sessions, and he wants to see his friends. He doesn't want to have to wait until there's a sibling group. So now we're helping parents coordinate meetups online with their children outside of the group. So one of the things that was important to me was making sure that parents and siblings have a new language to talk about what's happening in their families, because everyone needs to be on the same page. So that was one thing that was just personally important to me. So let's move to our next slide, the sibling experience. I want to go over some themes and patterns that have emerged among my research, that have emerged in my research among the siblings that have participated in this program. And again, I'm talking about siblings of kids with behavioral and mental health issues. Many of them do have autism, as I mentioned. There's, ADHD, autism, OCD. We see a lot of neurodevelopmental disorders, as I mentioned earlier. So the first, and I also should point out that the parent experience closely mirrors the sibling experience. So these patterns and themes that I'm about to put up on this slide, this is what these parents are dealing with as well. A pervasive sense of confusion. When you're growing up with a brother or sister that has unpredictable behavior or rapidly shifting moods, it can be very confusing for the siblings, equally confusing for the parents. Nobody wants to trigger behavior. So sometimes these siblings or parents are walking on eggshells. One thing that's particularly confusing for siblings is when they see their brother or sister held to a different set of expectations and rules of discipline, which can feel like a double standard. And one example I often use is if a sibling sees their brother or sister throw a chair across the room out of frustration. And then the parents are just trying to keep the peace. They're trying to keep everyone safe. They're trying to de-escalate the situation. But the siblings don't know that. What they see is that their brother just threw a chair across the room, swore at their mom, and now everyone's sitting down having ice cream. So that's an extremely confusing dynamic for the siblings. And, developmentally, they shouldn't have to understand why parents are making these choices to keep the peace. So the next theme that has emerged among the siblings in my research is safety issues. even if, so many of these siblings have been subjected, as I said earlier, to verbal or physical aggression. Even if they aren't subjected to physical and verbal aggression, they are often witnessing alarming conflicts between parents and the child with disabilities. And anytime a sibling is concerned for his or her own safety or the safety of family members, including the safety of the child with behavioral challenges, that can lead to anxiety. So we see a lot of siblings that have sleep problems, have impaired concentration in school, have been diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. The next theme that has emerged in my research is shame or embarrassment. It can be very embarrassing for siblings depending on their age. Usually the preteens are the most embarrassed because at that stage developmentally, they just want everyone to look and act normal. So, um, so when you have a brother or sister that has difficulty controlling their behavior at home or in the community or at school, siblings might not want to invite friends over. They might not want to be seen in school together. Or they might not want to participate in extracurricular activities if their sibling is involved. So that's all what I'm gathering from siblings. Parentification is another theme that has emerged in the research. Parentification, of course, is when children take on adult level responsibilities before they're developmentally ready to do so. And taking on this role of the little mother or the little father in the family can be the sibling's way of managing stress. It's also an indicator that they are missing out on their childhood. The next theme is independence, and this is one of the more positive themes that I can share. Because these siblings are accustomed to less parental attention, they tend to be more independent than their peers. Um, and younger siblings are typically capable of tasks that typically exceed their age range, such as putting themselves to bed, completing homework without help, preparing their own meals. Now, none of these are true for all siblings. I just want to reiterate that these are patterns that have emerged. But when we show this list to parents, they are nodding their head. Some parents say, all of this resonates with my family. The next theme is overprotectiveness. And this personally is an area of research that I'm really interested in, because even though so many of these siblings are being, are, as I said earlier, the targets of physical or verbal aggression, they can be fiercely protective of the brother or sister with challenges. In fact, many of them will challenge mom or dad and say, why are you punishing him? He didn't mean to do that. At the same time, the overprotectiveness can evolve into a cycle of protectiveness followed by avoidance. And that's what's so fascinating to me. So if the siblings are playing together nicely, and then the child with disabilities might lash out at the sibling, then the sibling might retreat to their room and just want to have nothing to do with the brother or sister. The next theme is competing for attention. And of course, all siblings, for those of you who are parents, or parents of multiple children, you know that all siblings compete for attention. But some siblings will resort to negative behaviors of their own in order to attract attention from their parents. But many siblings that we work with see how emotionally taxed their parents are, and they don't want to add to their burden. So they end up keeping a lot of personal worries to themselves. And that's one of the things we address in both the sibling group and the parent group that are happening simultaneously. The love-hate relationship is another dynamic, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It's when kids are best friends one minute, worst enemies the next. And the last theme that has emerged is a feeling of anger and resentment. And this is understandable. Siblings can feel resentful when their opportunities to do fun things are interrupted. If the whole family is supposed to go to the Star Wars movie, And then the brother or sister with disabilities has a meltdown, then all of a sudden, nobody gets to go to the movie. And parents often, well-meaning parents, I'm a parent myself, parents sometimes will justify this and say, oh, well, we can go to the movie next weekend. But for the sibling, this is a big part of their world. They wanted to go to the Star Wars movie and talk about it with their friends at lunch the next day. So, the anger and resentment is a big piece. Parents also can feel angry and resentment, and the child with disabilities can feel anger and resentment. Like, why does the typically developing sibling never get in trouble? A lot of kids with disabilities will feel that there's a double standard from their direction. So again, these are some themes that are helpful that we review with parents. I want to very quickly go over some strategies to support siblings, and I just want to go over this quickly because a lot more to convey, and we're already at the more than the halfway mark. So some of the strategies to support siblings that we review with parents, the main one is validation. Validating the sibling experience is extremely powerful. And by validation, what I mean is reflecting back or echoing back what you hear the sibling say. So if the sibling says, I wish my brother didn't have autism, a lot of parents well-meaning parents will say, oh, you don't mean that, or, oh, that's, God's plan for us, or they'll say something that distracts from what the sibling is trying to convey. So to validate that sibling, the parent could say, I can understand why you'd say you wish your brother didn't have autism, because I know it's really hard for you too. And that can open up a whole conversation. So validating the sibling experience does a couple of things. It lets the sibling know that parents have their back, that they understand what's going on with them, and that they value them enough to reflect back what they've heard. Another strategy that's equally important when possible is spending one-on-one time with siblings. And the one-on-one time doesn't have to be anything expensive or elaborate. It just involves the parent putting away their phone and sitting next to the child. They could be watching a movie together. They could be sitting in the car together. They could be at McDonald's together. And that one-on-one time doesn't have to involve any serious conversation. It's really just the physical presence of the parent. And what we find from that one-on-one time is that, again, it shows the sibling that they are valued enough in the family for the parent to take their time and make it a special one-on-one time. So that's just very briefly some strategies to support siblings. We have about 25 strategies that we review. Okay, this is an overwhelming slide. Don't freak out. So the reason I put this slide up was because this is a logic model that I worked on with my evaluation consultant before I started the sibling support initiative. And the beauty of a logic model is that it helps to guide your intervention. So if you see what's bolded in blue, those are, I don't even know if you guys can read this because oh, you can't. Well, and I can barely read it myself, so I apologize. Basically, it tells you what the activity is, what the outcomes are, and what the impacts are. So we don't need to go over this. I just really wanted to do a shout out for logic models because it helps to put your thinking into a formula that leads to impacts and outcomes. It's also helpful for getting grants if people can really see how you're thinking about your initiative. Okay, so I want to review very briefly some caregiver demographics and caregiver perceptions of this program. These are actually This is data from, these are data from the pilot program at Cambridge Health Alliance, and it hasn't changed a heck of a lot since it was piloted. And as you can see from this data, the primary language of participants that we're serving is English. We've been exploring ways to offer this program in different languages, such as using interpreters and translated materials and recruiting multilingual parent mentors. The educational levels are fairly evenly spread among high school graduates, some college graduates, and those with advanced degrees. The interesting part about this slide is, for me, is that the data show that only 11% of participants had prior experience with sibling support groups. And yet, as we'll see in the next slide, the rates of satisfaction and helpfulness are quite high, which suggests that this sibling support program is filling an unmet need. So in the caregiver perceptions, overall perception of this program is extremely positive. 97% of caregivers report that they would recommend the parent groups to others. 88% of caregivers report being very satisfied, which is the highest rank. The majority of caregivers felt that the group was helpful and that the group seemed to foster a safe and secure environment. 89% of the caregivers reported feeling very comfortable speaking in the group. And very quickly, I want to just review demographics and perceptions among the siblings. We see a similar trend. The majority of the siblings report they would recommend the sibling group to others, and nearly half of the siblings report either never having talked about their brother or sister with a supportive adult or being unsure whether they had. So again, what we're seeing is almost half of the sibling participants have never had an opportunity to talk about what's going on in terms of their sibling role. And the siblings in this pilot were almost evenly split between boys and girls, and we did have strong representation across age groups. So this is a description about how caregivers felt before participating, and the way a word cloud works, which you probably know, is that the more frequently a word appears in the cloud, the more frequently, or the bigger the word appears in the cloud, the more frequently the word had been used in survey responses. So we're seeing that parents, felt very overwhelmed, alone, unsure, confused. After participating, it is a dramatic positive trend in feeling better, feeling like there's access to resources, feeling they've gotten help and they're not alone. Similarly, with the siblings, we see the same positive trend. They show up feeling sad, scared, worried. They leave feeling happy, like a load has been lifted off of them to actually meet another child who shares their experience is profound for siblings, just as it is for adults. But it doesn't happen that often with the siblings. So I'm happy that we can provide that for them. Again, what siblings found most helpful is the word cloud telling us talk. They wanted to talk about what's going on, learn coping skills, meet other kids. So the trainees in our, Alicia, let me check in with you because it's 1:45, but I've got about 5 or 10 more minutes.
Yeah, go ahead, keep going. People, I have questions. That doesn't really mean anything because I always do, but go ahead and put them in the chat and we will make sure we get to them.
So the trainees that are participating as sibling group facilitators, again, they're fulfilling, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, they are fulfilling their requirements for group work through their rotations. And they are remarkable individuals. Many of our group facilitators identify as siblings of individuals with autism and other disabilities. So they are both personally and professionally invested in their role. So most experts agree that approaching mental health care in a family-centered way improves outcomes. Yet, many training programs don't have designated clinical experiences in working with families, and even fewer programs offer experiences working with siblings. This is especially true for psychiatry residency programs. And according to the literature, skills for working with families are frequently described as among the most important yet least taught skills during mental health training. And this was found to be true even with practitioners who work primarily with adult individuals. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I was going to talk about the methods, but instead, let's just go right to demographics, and I can answer questions about the methodology for this sub-research study, if there are any. Basically, this is a breakdown of the types of trainees who were participating in the sibling program, and the majority of the trainees at this time were from the adult psychiatry and child psychiatry program at Harvard Medical School. There were also a few social work interns who participated, but very few from psychology training. And this table shows the number of trainees from each group who reported working with siblings. As expected, those trainees who did not participate in this program had fewer opportunities to meet with siblings, hear their stories, and help them cope. And those trainees also reported less participation in family-centered mental health care in general. So taken together, these results suggest that participating as group facilitators in the sibling program gives trainees an invaluable, I shouldn't say invaluable, that's too biased on my part. So it gives trainees the opportunity to interact with siblings and provide vital experiencing and practice family-centered mental health care. So in the second part of the comparison survey that we used, we adapted questions from a survey called The Measure of Beliefs About Participation in Family-Centered Service. And as you can see from the data, the trainees who participated were much more likely to report that they had skills in providing family-centered care. They were more likely to report greater levels of confidence in those skills, and they reported greater intention to practice with a family-centered approach in the future. And then here are some quotes from the facilitators who were talking about how eye-opening this experience was to work with typically developing siblings. And the takeaways were that these trainees were more likely to have greater exposure to working with siblings, greater confidence in their family-centered care skills, and greater intention to practice in a family-centered way in the future. This is so exciting to me that, you know, this generation of clinicians is learning about sibling support. Oh, we are almost done. This is a flyer that it references the FAR Fund at the bottom of the flyer. And I want to give a shout out to Shirley Taylor, who is from the FAR Fund, who is at this presentation right now. And we received funding from the FAR Fund to launch an autism and siblings program. So this is the flyer that is sent out to agencies across the country and Facebook pages across the country for families that are interested in joining the community site program at UMass Medical School. And as you see, we kind of start off with saying, do you have a child with behavioral challenges? Do you have other children who are impacted? Please join us. This is intended for families of youth with autism, developmental disabilities, and mental health issues. And it was very important to me to be clear upfront about what this sibling group was about, because the sibling experience of children with other types of disabilities like blindness, cerebral palsy, you know, those disabilities are very worthy of having tailored attention on those topics, but mental health and behavioral health is a different beast. And I have some resources listed.